Hello. I think I'm John Asack. Who
Are you
knows?
sure?
How do you? I'll pinch myself. Oh, um, and this is my glamorous assistant, Spike Robinson.
Where do you get glamorous from?
It's a standard magician's introduction. My glamorous assistant. Yeah. When I said it at Toronto in 2015, you blanched. It's great to see.
Well, I don't have the legs for the sparkly tutu and tights, so.
Well, get some. You know, stop lazing about and get some sparkly tighted legs and tutu. But so is it famous late TV presenter here who interviewed the wife of the magician Paul Daniels, and her question was, "So, what was it that attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels?" He's a small bald man, and she was his glamorous assistant. Oh well, that's got to start. I'd just like to point out to anybody that hasn't noticed that we've actually passed 500,000 views on two videos. Yeah, oh, one with Lad Bible, um, and the other with Andrew Gold. So, and it, come here and watch us here. We're much funnier here than I was on those things. But this is the chance. So more than 1 million views on two videos, and they're picking up 1 or 2 thousand views a day every day. I've no idea why. I don't know what I said that was so immediate. And there are no penguins in either of those videos.
No antique mandolins,
Not
no
a single,
ritual art.
no Weechol art. This is where I was sitting when I did. Oh no, the Lad Bible, I went to their studio, but with the Andrew Gold, the little bird behind me, which is Weechol. Oh, there it is.
Beautiful. I love that thing.
Yeah, I mean they're tourist pieces, but the Huichol, just an incredible people. Central Mexico, um, wonderful story. Ran away from the conquistador, and who can blame them?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's all going very well. I'm working on a new book, which will mention Scientology, and we'll say some things that nobody has yet worked out about Scientology. And we're going to talk a little bit about the New Age, which is actually should now be called the Old Age because it's been around for more than 100 years now. So the new Eon, as Aleister Crowley called it, bless him, um, and occult connections and the Nazis, got to get them into any book. Done a lot of work on that, a lot of stuff that is not generally known, which makes connection to some of the curious ideas of Scientology. And my thought is that as we've seen, it was Ramakrishnan, the second premier of India, who said absurd beliefs can lead to atrocious behaviors. And that's my fundamental theme. My idea is simply this: if David Miscavige ruled the world or had political power, what would the world look like? And I would suggest that it would look like a fascist dictatorship, because Scientology is completely without democracy. Hubbard was anti-democratic. He said that only people who are above 2.0 on the tone scale should be allowed to vote. And then he said, only Scientologists are above 2.0 on the tone scale. The rest of you are all below death, which is zero. Um,
What's
it be
2.0?
Sorry,
What's
2.0.
2.0?
Oh, antagonism. Yeah, above that you're fine. You're allowed to vote. Once you've taken the antagonism
This
test.
is a scale that does not have compassion, love. Does it have joy?
No, we don't do that kind of thing. But it does have things like pain, which aren't actually emotions, or sympathy, no sympathy, which sympathy is sympathy and emotion. I don't think it is. Empathy is emotional, but it also has making amends, which is, and blame, shame, and regret once you get below death. It's a nonsense. I know Chris Shelton's been doing work on it. I don't know if he's published it yet. But basically what Hubbard took were the medieval humours. I would go back before that to Garland, around about the 1st century AD, where you've got the blood, the sanguine or cheerful. You've got the polar, the yellow bile, being choleric or angry.
Mhm.
The melanchola, which is melan means black. Chola is again bile, and that's being a bit sad. And then you've got the phlegmatic, the snotty people who are apathetic. So you've got apathy, sadness, anger, and cheerfulness. That's the original thing. And until into the 18th century, this was a part of any decent doctor's practice, along with a few leeches.
It's always puzzled me that they did a lot of bloodletting, but nobody ever did, or at least I don't know, did any snot letting or bile
Yeah,
letting.
it's disappointing, isn't it, really? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, makes you bilious, doesn't it, with rage? What can I say?
No,
Anyway,
just curious.
I talked with Claire Headley on Monday and recorded something, which hopefully she'll put up soon. I want to make it very clear that there is no ruinous feud between myself and the Aftermath Foundation. I said I'd be with them for a few months to try and ease the rift that happened when Aaron Smith Levin uh, parted company with them because of irreconcilable differences. I think that's the best way to put it. And along the way, I talked with Aaron. We had a perfectly amicable conversation. I talked with people at Aftermath, and I hope that things have settled down and the war that was the internecine, there's a good word, the mutually destructive war that was going on, hopefully has died down and people can get on with something else to amuse themselves. So my time was done at the Aftermath Foundation, but I'm still consulting to them to work on recovery materials and stuff like that. But anyway, I talked with her on Monday, and her last question to me was, what would I recommend that you give to somebody who's still believes in Scientology? What material? And um, I think this is going to be off the cuff. This is not going to be detailed, and we might come up with something more thorough later on. But
Mm.
there are books, documentaries, and films that can be very useful.
And I
Um,
will link some of them in the description below. While you were looking for the Secret Lives L. Ron Hubbard, I found another one that has you practically as a puppy in it, 1980 something John in it. And I found it and linked it. I'll link it again.
well, you see, these are not the things that you can show to somebody who's a
No,
believing
that's true.
Scientologist.
That's true.
So we we've got to separate things out in terms of, so somebody's a convinced Scientologist. What can you give them that they'll even look at? Well, it mustn't say John Atack on it.
No.
Or
How would you rate the Skipper letter
well,
and materials
no,
that?
you see, yeah, you see. Okay, let's lay the guidelines.
Okay.
In 1983, when I left Scientology, I started to learn how you talk to Scientologists, and I found there were certain things that bring up a wall of
Mhm.
confirmation bias, of cognitive dissonance that you just can't get through. So if you suggest that there was anything wrong with Ron Hubbard, oh, forget it. That's
Okay.
not the approach to take. The approach to take is directly to teach somebody things about mind control, not an expression I particularly like. I must say, brainwashing, mind control. Thought reform is better. Manipulation is quite a good word. Exploitative persuasion, Margaret Singer's term of use, is very good.
Mhm.
So teaching people about exploitative persuasion without talking about Hubbard or Scientology, that's one avenue. Um, if you are going to go after Scientology itself, then you should look solely at um, how the organization is violating the policy of Ron Hubbard. That's it. You don't say, you don't call David Miscavige an asthmatic dwarf or stuff like that. Just ridiculous ideas. The kind of vitriolic approach is not going to work. Um, Trying to argue with somebody is not going to work. Trying to dissuade them of their belief, it doesn't happen. So the first part is, when I was doing interventions, which I stopped doing in 1995 because it's not a good idea. for the person doing them. It's a very good idea for the person having it done, but the amount of harassment and nonsense that came because of that was just too much. So, but when I was doing formal interventions, which I did it for 4 or 5 years back then, everybody who spoke to me decided they didn't want to be in Scientology anymore. Nobody who spoke to me went to the independents afterwards either. They looked at it, and my intention was not, I'm not especially interested in changing anybody's mind. I'm certainly not interested in converting anybody to my personal ridiculous beliefs. I am interested in helping people to get better information and know how to deal with it and make their own decisions and decide what's best for themselves. And so in going into interventions, it was never my intention to convert somebody out of Scientology. It's my intention to give them information they didn't have. And as we all know, I have a lot of information about Scientology. And to let them make a choice. And it wasn't programmatic, that the conversation would depend on what they needed to know. And I made myself available to their questions. I first of all would make it clear that I was there on their behalf. And, there were other people doing this who would take a whole family in, a whole bunch of people in with them. And you're kind of going, oh, Robert J. Lifton's milieu control. That's interesting. So I'd
Or
go
hot
in.
seat. Anybody who's been in any decent cult, that would immediately re-traumatize them if they'd ever gotten any hot seat treatment.
Yeah. I mean, there is a hot seat equivalent in Scientology, but it tended to be more the one-on-one severe reality adjustment, which I only saw once in my 9 years in Scientology. And it shocked me and was one of the things that, when I found out from the person who'd done it, they'd learned it from Hubbard. It really put me off Hubbard.
I've heard tell of what they called gangbangs, but that was in the double
gangbang sec checks during
in the hole.
82, 83 and onward into the hole. That's true, which is a very vicious form of hot seat. And for anybody that's not familiar with the term hot seat, it's where you make an individual the focus of the whole group's attack. And you're quite right. It is a gangbang sec check. Because I never experienced such things. It's not uppermost in my mind.
Lucky
but,
man.
Even if you were taking a group of people in, you weren't taking them in to criticize the person. But so it's not that. And of course, that hot seat technique, the gangbang sec check, does have its origins in the Chinese brainwashing program. It was an aspect of the program that when you were first put into a cell, when you'd first arrived, the other people in the cell had the job of demeaning you and humiliating you and taking away your grasp of reality and your trust in yourself, because they were in the last stage of the program. And once they'd done that, they could be let out. So destroying your confidence in yourself, your self-esteem, it's a part of the program. So I would go into the room with my assistant, my dear assistant, Bonnie Woods, exceptional, lovely person. And her job was to watch me and see when I got tired and then make a joke and distract attention away from me while I had a cup of tea. And
the rodeo clown.
Yeah, she was the rodeo clown. I think she'd like that description.
Function of the rodeo clown.
To making sure that John can have a cup of tea. But the process that we go through, I'd first of all say, your mum, dad, brother, friend, cousin, grandchild, or whoever thinks that you've been brainwashed by a cult. And I'm here to help you explain to them the reality of the situation. And we might get off into the pejorative meanings of cult and the idea of brainwashing, but usually we didn't. I would then show them Captive Minds, Hypnosis and Beyond. Now, this video is on our website. You can't show a John Atack website to a Scientologist, I'm afraid, because they have had phobia induced about me. I am a bad OT, a
There's
bad
several
boy.
copies of it available on YouTube as well, separate
You
from.
can always download it from YouTube.
Yes.
Um, but it's a little bit weird because you've got 1982 lapels and hair and things, but it
Oh, the 80s.
remains, sadly. I've several times in my life tried to put money together to renew this, make it more useful, but the money has not been forthcoming. It would be very good to update it, but it's the best I know in terms of explaining what hypnotism, mind control, compliance are. I used to show that, and that gives the person some idea of these mechanisms. And as a Scientologist, they're going to say, oh, we don't do any of those things. So then we'd have a conversation about that, any points they'd noticed, anything they were interested in. Then I would show them a film called My Dance is Complete, about the Rajneeshis and their takeover of in Oregon of the town of Antelope and the setting up of the Big Muddy, where there were about 10,000 Rajneeshis moving in on a town of about 200 people. Now, the huge 6-part documentary Wild Wild Country covers this period and has some very good material in it, but it's not useful in this context because it doesn't show any of the rank and file members. It doesn't show the 19-hour days that they were working. It shows the relationship to the town of Antelope and how the senior figures in the Rajneesh movement responded at the time and how they respond now. So you find that there are distinct factions. I don't think any two of them agree. I briefly had contact with somebody who had the lawyer, Rajneesh's lawyer, and I offered assistance in the case, and the guy decided not to talk to me. I can't imagine why. He's still thoroughly convinced by Bhagwan, the supreme one, and what have you. So that video is interesting if you're interested in extremist authoritarian sects, as a friend Christian calls them, or cults, as dangerous cults. But it's not useful for the purposes here. I've not been able to find a copy of My Dance is Complete, so hopefully somebody will, and they'll give us a link to it. And it's a very safe thing to show to a Scientologist. You're using what's called paralleling. Instead of saying, you believe a load of stupid nonsense, which doesn't tend to interest people particularly as a way of having dialogue, you're saying, oh, these people believe a load of stupid nonsense, and they'll agree with you. Because they do, So, and that's a general idea that any book that's about a group other than Scientology may be useful. And so there we're talking about non-fiction. So interesting, isn't it, that you have fiction and non-fiction? You don't have fiction and fact in our society. Sometimes hard to tell the difference. I would then have a conversation with the person to say, do you see any similarities between this group and Scientology? And the answer was no. And I would then say, you notice that they talk about the media and they call them the poodle press. The media is lapdog of some interest somewhere. Rupert Murdoch, probably. And they would usually concede that. By that time, we've been talking for 3 or 4 hours, and it's time to show the shrinking world of L. Ron Hubbard. And I would just like to publicly bless Charlie Nairn yet again for making that incredible documentary. It's only 20 minutes long, back in 1968. We have it on our channel. If you haven't watched it, you should watch it. It's the only hostile film interview of Ron Hubbard, and he is pathetic. He sits there blinking at the camera. And when he's asked, he talks about having a first wife and a third wife, and he had no second wife. But he did say elsewhere he wasn't very good at mathematics. I had no second wife. And he's asked about his Swiss bank accounts, and he starts saying, I don't have. And then he says, I do have a Swiss bank account. And he's asked about, you believe in reincarnation? And he pauses. And so Charlie says, but your followers believe in reincarnation. He goes, oh, yes. Now, that would take us back to the Skipper letter, 1938, which is referenced in Scientology, The Cult of Greed, my little book. I can't remember how much
I
of it we
have it
printed.
in my picture files because I brought it up on the screen
Mm.
usually when it's mentioned with that
Yeah, but
set.
we want people to buy my book, Spike, you know.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm
She's just
sorry.
giving it away. She's just giving it away, you know.
I know, I know. You know, one of the things that I was thinking of when you're talking about this is that one of the things that I find very frustrating about documentaries on cults is that they show the abuses or the victims or they show the top people, but very, 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 very rarely do they actually get into the mechanics of manipulation so that Joe and Jane Q. Public are left with, I would never do that. What heightened it for me is this when I go through the comments every once in a while on Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard, I see a lot of people going, how could anybody believe this garbage with that guy at the helm? And what they don't realize is that your average Scientologist never saw L. Ron Hubbard as he appears in Shrinking World.
No, and you have to see the eyes through which the leader is seen. I mean, I've said this many times before. Margaret Singer said it too, that people who are sure they are not vulnerable are the most vulnerable. In fact, I've just had the privilege of sitting on a doctoral committee, and it's on cybersecurity. And I was kind of, why are you asking me? I'm not an academic. I don't have any academic qualifications. I dropped out of school. And so, well, I've referenced you in the dissertation more than anyone else because I'm looking at how aware are people of manipulation. So this is a guy called Dustin Steinhagen who'll be appearing on the channel probably next month. And he did this brilliant piece of work, but he put out a survey and he found that the majority of people in South Dakota that he surveyed are fully aware that there's such a thing as manipulation. And he was able to show my contention about vulnerability that there are a couple of people who don't believe there's any such thing. And it indicates that, yeah, they would be the people who are easier to recruit.
There's no such thing as manipulation. By the way, would you like to buy this soap from my MLM?
Exactly. And we live in a world of advertising and propaganda and mind changing. The letter I was talking about is here.
Yeah.
It's extracted in this little booklet here, which we thoroughly recommend. You can even get it as an audio book, but I would like to point out that as an audio book, you won't get a copy of the letter. It also tells you that letter, living is a pretty grim joke, and the only thing Ron Hubbard wanted to do was to smash his name into history because he didn't believe in immortality. So his
Mhm.
followers believe in reincarnation. That letter is actually registered for copyright at the Library of Congress by Author Service Incorporated, which is a part of the Scientology empire. So it has provenance. This is a genuine L. Ron Hubbard 1938 letter. Thoroughly recommend it. But you can't really show it to a practicing Scientologist because it'll be fake news. It'll be a forgery. It'll be fraudulent. And you don't want to waste your time trying to battle your way through that. So, I mean, moving over to those are the documentaries I used to use. And that's so any documentary that's about another cult. I've just finished watching the original release of Stolen Youth,
Mm,
which is three-part series.
mhm.
There's a fourth part now. And if you want to see how people can be taken in, this guy, Larry Ray, moved in to the student house at Sarah Lawrence, prestigious, very prestigious
Okay.
college. There are 8 students there. His daughter was there. He'd just come out of prison.
Mhm.
And he then he gets 6 of the 8 people, and they end up giving up 10 years of their life to him. One of them is trafficked as a prostitute for several years and earns him millions of dollars. and he tortures them. And the amazing thing is that there are recordings as they go along. From the very beginning, there were audio and some video recordings. As a video recording of him torturing a guy, putting a clamp on his tongue, saying, "I'm going to rip your tongue in half." And you kind of go, how on earth could anybody be so stupid? Well, first off, these are students at Sarah Lawrence. These are among the brightest people in the United States, among the brightest 19-year-olds in the United States. One of them, Santos, recruits both of his sisters. His older sister, Felicia, has a Harvard degree. She has a medical doctorate from Columbia, and she's on an internship in psychiatry in LA when she's recruited. And you see her go through a total breakdown.
The episode Living in Larryland, I think it is, shows even after he's been arrested and is being brought to justice, these two women still believing and still living with his rules because they haven't quite gotten themselves out yet.
Yeah, which is Felicia is one of them. So she's a medical doctor. She failed to get her doctoral license. She was 2 weeks short of it when Larry Ray talked her out. Now, there's a fourth episode, which I haven't seen and which was not part of the series, where Felicia talks about her recovery. But to see the process there, and let me make one thing very clear here. Don't recommend anything to somebody that you have not read or watched yourself. You have to be involved in the process.
Yes.
And you may feel that it's not the right thing for your friend. So in which case, don't do it. There are some things, Stolen Youth is very serious. If you can get somebody to sit down and watch it with you, don't comment on it. Don't try and draw any parallels with Scientology. Let the person think for themselves. Let this seep in. But at the other end, there are some, things that I've recommended for many years. Leap of Faith, Deborah Winger and Steve Martin. This is based on the real life story of a Christian evangelical con man. I would say The Righteous Gemstones, about mega churches and the scams that are going on there. Monty Python's Life of Brian, if somebody is inclined that way, actually has more material about cults and how they function than almost anything else.
That whole scene of this is the way of the sandal, this is the way of the gourd, and you see the schisms already, and just the people trying to rationalize, oh no, he dropped this sandal to show us that we must walk in his footsteps. As like,
he's not the Messiah, he's a very naughty boy. And a Red Sea pedestrian. Yeah, just so much there, but Loretta can have the right to have a baby. Very important, and humor is very important. That being able to laugh, if there's one mark of cult membership of somebody having come under authority, they're angry, they're upset, they cannot laugh at things.
Humor is forbidden. I know this. I've experienced this firsthand. And going back to Stolen Youth, I would say don't recommend it to anybody who's still severely traumatized, because I mean, I've been out of my group for over 20 years. I found it a little traumatizing myself, mainly because I was in a small group with hot dynamics just like that. So it really took me right back to 20, however many years ago, going on 30. But it's very instructive too.
Yeah.
However, I needed a long hug and a gallon of Ben and Jerry's chocolate fudge therapy after watching Living in Larryland.
That brings us to the notion of catharsis, that people watch horror movies. I'm not one of them. People watch horror movies because they're cathartic. It rouses your responses, your adrenaline responses. And of course, on the back of your adrenaline responses, you have your opioid responses, the natural opiate drugs that are in our system, the endogenous morphine, endorphin, or enkephalin responses. And I don't get that. I don't do things that scare me. I don't put myself in danger, and I never have. As a kid, I wanted to know that I was not going to break my legs or something. And when I later, many years later, read about psychopaths and how they force people to take risks and come on, you coward, get on with it. It doesn't mean, I wasn't a wimpy kid. I got into fights and all that kind of stuff, but I was not willing to put myself at risk, and I'm still not, which may have been a useful thing. So I don't find horror movies cathartic, but I understand that many people do. And I do understand that, the Greek tragedy, from the word tragos, meaning the song of a goat.
Really?
Yeah, the word tragedy, it means goat song.
How did I skip that with all my courses in etymology?
Who knows? It's incredible, isn't it? God, the ignorance.
Well,
Who'd
no,
have
I
thought?
mean, it was a specific study of mine back in my undergrad days. I fell in
Mm,
love with etymology for a year.
oh,
Thought I was good in any case. Song of
ma-
a goat?
maybe it was entomology you were studying by mistake.
Yeah,
Um,
that's why I
so
always was getting bugged. Sorry.
that really won't do. Insect joke, so it's just not proper. Um, Catharsis. So from I found the Larry Ray story deeply disturbing, but sometimes that's the medicine.
That's true.
Sometimes you have to see that, and seeing that somebody else went through that. You know, I've just been reading a lot of stuff about concentration camps, and I'm not finding it cathartic. There does come a point where I'm kind of going, these people were not very nice, you
No.
know. But it does show me something about the dynamics of human behavior, that you can take a whole population and get them to support a regime that is quite obviously devastatingly destructive, anti-human. That this idea of Aryan supremacy, which is genetically so nonsensical. I mean, I've just written a chapter about eugenics, and the idea that so many people, George Bernard Shaw,
Mm.
David Herbert Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence, supported the idea of massacring some defective part of the population. Uh, and of course, and it happened in the US, sterilization programs, in India, of course, in the 1970s. Under Donald Trump, there were sterilizations of immigrant women who'd been caught crossing the border, which is a
All you
eugenics
have to
program.
do is convince them that they're trying to take away our way of life. That's
Well,
powerful.
all you have to do is say, there's us, we're
And
human beings, and them, they're animals, they're subhuman, they're vermin, they're not worthy of anything, and they're taking the jobs away from blacks and Latinos. Thanks. She was black and now she's Indian. She's turned Indian. It's like, okay. So yeah, you just any kind of us and them will do. They are less than we are. And one can understand that in a tribal way. If your tribe is coming to attack my tribe, then look out. We're gonna until we're sure we can have a peaceful coexistence, one understands that xenophobia, fear of Xenu,
the whole
that
first
some
chapter
tribes
of
have.
2001: A Space Odyssey is the two warring tribes of proto-humanoids.
Mm. Yeah, and Arthur C. Clarke was one of the most evil people who ever lived. Let's not even go there.
No.
Um, Speaking of child molesting, um, which we aren't. So there are pieces of fiction. Um, um, This Perfect Day, R11, which you introduced me to.
I think it's better than Brave New World, frankly.
I think that people who say this is better than
Oh,
that
okay, fair
are
enough.
not good enough, frankly. It's like,
I'm
you
not
know,
saying it's not
what a
good enough.
ridiculous comparison,
I
Spot.
I find that it
You
shows.
prefer it. Let's get it down to that.
Okay,
It's not better than. Yeah.
okay,
Excuse,
fair enough.
excuse me. I'm
In
bullying you.
my humble opinion, I think it shows the process of domination a little bit better.
Well, in my humble opinion, it's based upon Brave New World. So it expands upon ideas that
Fair enough.
Brave New World was published in what, 1932,
Okay, fair enough.
and nobody had talked about cloning before.
Okay.
Nobody had listed epsilon
I mean,
demi-morons.
I love Brave New World, don't get me
Good.
wrong. I
I won't.
just feel that for a textbook on human manipulation, This Perfect Day goes just a little further.
I don't. I think Huxley goes further, but I
Oh,
think that
well, oh,
Levin is more approachable. It's easier. It's a more direct route. There's if we want to get scholarly about it, Huxley wrote a book called Brave New World Revisited in 1954, where he compares Brave New World with 1984. And of course, he was, Orwell is dead by this time. 1984 is his last book. He's dying as he writes it. But Huxley is an interesting and weird character. He believed in the Bates eye system, which is complete nonsense. Wrote a book called The Art of Seeing about it. And it's the idea, and he threw away his glasses, and people who saw him at lectures say he couldn't read his notes anymore because he believed in Bates. And of course, his last words on his deathbed were LSD, try some, because he went out tripping. But nonetheless, in 1954, he wrote this remarkable comparison of his work in Brave New World and what Orwell was saying in 1984. And he points out quite rightly, 1984 can't keep functioning.
no,
That society, which is, of course, the Soviet society as Eric Blair, George Orwell saw it, it will collapse.
yeah,
The Society of Brazil in Terry Gilliam's fantastic movie, it will collapse.
yeah.
Whereas Brave New World is a way of keeping it functioning. If you want to go off into movies on that, you've got the movie of 1984, which is awful. You've got Brazil by Terry Gilliam, which is brilliant. George Lucas's first film, which most people haven't seen.
VHX 1138.
Yeah.
It is a masterwork. And there it is. That's why 1984 society would collapse, is because they're not keeping the populace drugged, happy, and distracted.
Soma.
Exactly. I mean, they had Soma, we have TikTok.
Oh, I know which one I'd prefer. And then there are Tic Tacs, and this proves inflate. No, let's not get into that.
No.
This one's bigger than this one. It's inflated.
I will say, though, that This Perfect Day does have some problematic elements to it as well. There's one scene where the main character sexually assaults this woman, and she falls in love with him because he has a right to her, because he's a male character and she's a female character. And
Trauma
that's the
bonding.
way that, and Ira Levin, well, yeah.
But he did give us the Stepford Wives as
Give
well.
us the Stepford Wives, yes. But there was a trope, and it's still sort of creepily way that females aren't quite fully rationally human. They are trophies to be gained for the male main character. Now that's going away. But it's still, back then was still, he loves this woman, so of course she's going to fall in love with him by the end of the movie or the book.
Yeah.
And that's my
not something
problem.
that happens in Brave New World, of course. The
No, not at all. No. No.
So there's another danger, which is, one would like to say, well, we'll read Robert Cialdini's Influence. And for anybody that hasn't, please do. Because here is an absolutely even-handed description of the 7 ways of influence. You have a little poster that you made of it, which everybody should have.
Yeah, we got it downloaded for your site for free downloadable. Put it on your refrigerator. Yeah.
That gives you 7 ways of looking at persuasion and influence. And he's not saying this is necessarily a negative thing.
No.
He's saying these are ways of influencing people.
Yeah, he says that these can be used for good or for bad, just like a steak knife. It can be used to cut your meat. It can be used to harm somebody.
So you're eating meat now. So these are both bad things, Spike. It can be used to cut your banana.
I use a spoon to cut my banana.
Well, I hope any vegans who are watching this are not deeply insulted by this idea that it's a good thing to cut meat, and we apologize for Spike's terrible.
Terrible carnivore
I
existence.
mean, Hitler didn't eat meat.
Way Gewalt.
Yeah. He liked dogs too. He ate a lot of sugar.
Another thing, though, when getting back to the fiction that is
Mm,
good, as I've always thought that Animal Farm was excellent because it
mm,
shows how these animals are really idealistic. They've got a
mm,
great, wonderful vision of this beautiful future.
mm,
And slowly, bit by bit, it gets taken away
mm.
until this what was supposed to be an idealistic paradise for animals is worse than it was when they were under the yoke of Farmer Jones? Farmer whatever it was.
Yeah, it's superb. And I think there's a version illustrated by Ronald Searle.
Mhm. I've got a
Always
video
worth having.
right over here that on the back says, "A fun adventure for all the family."
Two legs bad, four legs good. All animals are equal. Some animals are more equal than others. Yeah, Animal Farm's a very good starting place. It's very easy to understand. And of course, if you do, as I say, you have to read this yourself first. And if you do recommend it to a friend or give it to a friend who's a Scientologist, no sermon involved. You don't get to tell them what to think. It's just got to be, this is a really interesting book.
Because you can't evaluate for the pre-clear.
Well, you can evaluate for the pre-clear. I mean, getting them to read Ron Hubbard's books is pure and absolute evaluation. I want to make it clear that Scientology is nothing but evaluation.
Yeah.
Of course, the concept of evaluation in therapy is also to be found in the work of Carl Rogers, and is fundamental to his person-centered, was client-centered, also called Rogerian, which is a useful approach in some cases, not in all. But it's something, Christian Shurko, I was practicing his name when I was talking with him last night, that he will use. So if you give somebody a copy of This Perfect Day or Animal Farm, you ask them to read it. These days, you're usually better off with a movie, something they can watch, especially with Scientologists, because unfortunately the study tech tends to make people not want to read things. Who'd have figured? I've met this so often in ex-members that oh, could I have the audiobook? Okay. It takes me 3 times as long to listen to something as it does to read it. So I really don't want the audiobook, but I will keep making audiobooks, and you can get Scientology, Cult of Greed and Opening Our Minds as audiobooks, edited by Spike Robinson. Imagine that. And in my own dulcet tones, the ASMR version of.
It was so hard to edit those because I kept on drifting and all. You have a very soft, pleasant voice, so it was
How
hard to
kind.
go, "Oh, wait, he just said, I've gotta edit that out."
Yeah, it is a bad thing. So the problem with Cialdini is he was a professor of psychology, and you have to be aware of the phobias induced in Scientologists for the word psyche, meaning butterfly or spirit, and giving us the word psychology, the study of butterflies. Oh no, that's lepidopterism. Lepidology? I'm not really sure about that.
Adoptery.
Yeah, I know. Um, I was trying to get an ology in there to see if
Oh,
that would move us along, but it's not going to happen. So you do have to be aware of phobias, and so your best bet is, if you've got a movie like Leap of Faith, very good point, sit down with a person and watch it,
mhm.
and then get them to talk about it. Don't you tell them what it means. Get them to connect intellectually, because often we only understand things when we have to describe them. It's a part of how we understand things. So, yeah, what did they see in it? And that's got butterflies in it too, hasn't it? It's got monarch butterflies in it, Leap of Faith. It's got a whole, yeah, you've forgotten that bit, haven't you? They
Huh.
come in, they meet a migration of monarch butterflies in it. It's a lovely scene. With documentaries, I mean, The Seduced and The Vow
Mhm.
about Nexium, I thoroughly recommend Sarah Edmondson's Scarred as a book.
Yes.
It might vaguely mention Scientology because Nexium, of course, was an amalgam of neuro-linguistic programming and Scientology. But I don't remember her making any particular point about it.
Yeah, I don't think I remember her making too much of a point about it either.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked with Mark Vicente, which he tells me is how his surname is pronounced. Vicente. Vicente. He's of Portuguese descent, not Italian. But we've done one video, and I need to get back to him and do another. And he is very much aware of the Scientology influence on Keith Raniere. But generally, if you find something, I mean, another great book is The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. And I've had many ex-members comment on how valuable that was to them, because Hoffer is somebody who is just looking at it in an abstract way. He's not involved in a cult group per se. He's just looking at the way people believe.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, there are many excellent books that could be used, but they use the word cult in their title.
Mhm.
And none of us particularly like to be associated with such a thing. I can say that Margaret Singer's book, which Janja Lelic co-authored, Cults in Our Midst, does not mention Scientology because, as Margaret pointed out to me, they didn't want to be sued. So
Yeah.
there is mention of somebody who'd had one hit on a joint and were told they were a drug addict, and they don't say the cult was, in fact, or the group was in fact Scientology that had
Mm.
put this idea forward. So it
That's
might
the one
be,
I found the most useful in my own healing.
yeah, absolutely. But person has to kind of cross the line out of the group
Yeah,
before they can read books with the word cult in them or
I had to
about
know that
Scientology.
I had to already be at the state where I was like, "This was horrible. This was bad. This was a
Mm.
cult," before I could pick up any of those books. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't phobic about any words, and I'd read Cults of Unreason, the chapter on Scientology. I'd skimmed through Roy Wallace's Road to Total Freedom, and I'd just like to say it's a bridge to total freedom, not a road. And it goes up, like all bridges do. You go up the bridge. Um, and I'd also read The Mindbenders by Cyril Vosper. So as a Scientologist, I didn't see why I shouldn't read these things. So this idea of people being phobic, it's just grow up, you know. But the reality is that people don't want to. It's something that really interests me about the concept of the suppressive person in Scientology, this idea that there are people you shouldn't talk to. Why shouldn't you talk to them? What's going to happen?
Mhm.
They will use their influence on you to somehow. I've never had this experience. I don't think I've ever been vulnerable to malicious animal magnetism, which is, of course, Hubbard never gets to say it, but that's what he's talking about. He gets the idea from Mary Baker G. Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, who basically took the ideas of Phineas Quimby, isn't it? What a lovely name, who was the founder of the New Thought movement and quite open about, the reality of what he was doing was hypnotism. Hubbard digs into this. There's actually a story, and I wish I could find it. It's one of the things that's gone missing over the decades, where Hubbard castigates Christian Science and this
Mm.
stupid idea that you can make things happen by willpower. And then that becomes a central tenet. And I'm
Yeah.
going to say tenet here because I'm tired of hearing people say tenant instead of tenet. I mean, good
Yes.
grief. Oh, it's appalling. Really is.
Next, they'll be dipping them up some sherbet.
So malicious animal magnetism, the idea of animal magnetism, which comes back from Mesmer, who thought to have introduced hypnotism to the West, in fact, or introduced hypnotism. Hypnotism goes back forever. You'll find Sufi texts going back hundreds of years that talk about inducing these states. I think in the Buddhist Abhidharma, you've got an understanding of these states. I'm sure the Hindus have got some idea of it, and Christian mystics had some idea of it and what you're doing, creating a different state of reality in a person. But Mesmer comes along, and it's believed that hypnotism is a fluid that is transferred from one person to another. Or, you know, Mesmer would have these vats with rods coming out, and you'd hold the rod, and this fluid, you know, like electricity, which was rather mysterious and still is, as far as I can tell, this would flow into you. And this was called animal magnetism. And Mary Baker Eddy turns it into malicious animal magnetism. And Hubbard, when he's said, I mean, I talked with John McMaster, the world's first real clear, back in '65. And he was mystified that Hubbard had decided he was clear, and he didn't really know what that was, and he didn't know why he was the first one. But he did say this is at the time when Hubbard's developing the fair game law and all these ideas about the anti-social personality, a psychiatric term adopted by Hubbard to mean somebody who didn't like Ron Hubbard, the antisocial personality, the suppressive person. And John said, he said one day, I sat with him in his office, and I said, well, why are we running away from these people? Why aren't we healing them? Because if we healed the suppressives, the world will get better so much more quickly. Why are we cowards? Why do we run away from them? And the answer is they might persuade you that Ron Hubbard's not a really good person, and you shouldn't be giving your love, devotion, and surrender to him. So malicious animal management. So I didn't have this phobic thing, and I've had to get used to this idea of, you know, these things of, oh no, can't go near that. But you have to be careful with it, because otherwise the person won't listen to you. They won't take any notice.
It is a real indoctrinated thing, even though I was well out by the time I got to my 30th birthday. I had been told that I would die if I ever left by my 30th birthday. So my 30th birthday, I will admit to just a little bit of trepidation, even though I was well out, you know, engaged to the wonderful man that I eventually married, had my own life, had been out of the group for a while. I still was engaged with a bit of mystical thinking, people who believed in crystals and auras and fairies.
Let's say magical thinking now.
Magical thinking.
We could,
yes.
Yeah. Mystical thinking is not a bad thing.
No, but magical thinking where, you know, if you have bad energy, bad things will come, and you know,
if you don't have enough penguins in the room, disaster will occur.
Always all about the penguins.
And well, you know, they are a little bit obvious. You may not be seeing them behind you, but you know, I can see 3 of them from here. 4, 5, 6, 7 penguins.
That's only a fraction. There's
a fraction of the penguins. Yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's a lot in this room.
Yeah, exactly. And if they weren't there, the evils would come.
No, but they are a comfort.
Yes. Yeah, like we went to hospital the other day for my son to have something checked, and the nurse was absolutely wonderful, and she picked up this little plastic thing and she said, "This is my emotional support turtle."
Seriously, I can look over to this couch and I see these penguins, and they do calm me down.
I knew that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for those people out there who are not calmed by penguins, and I can't imagine there is anybody, you know, because a penguin is a very calming creature, and they smell of fish. But finding that fundamentally there are lots of books and lots of movies, and we'll over the please get into the comments and suggest things that you think are useful. It is a terrible shame that so many books won't be read because a psychiatrist like Robert J. Lifton or a psychologist like Robert Cialdini wrote them. And if you just wanted to get straight to it, then Robert J. Lifton's Destroying the World to Save It, for anybody who wants to understand the cult mentality, this is a key book to
This
find
is.
out how a premier Japanese heart surgeon was convinced that he should murder people, and how a group of people decided they collected enough sarin nerve gas to kill 4 million people. And you're not dealing with idiots and losers. You're dealing with very competent,
Well,
intelligent people who've
Heaven's
been.
Gate was almost exclusively computer geeks, geniuses, PhDs,
And
and
people with no testicles.
I still remember because I was just barely recovering myself when the news came on, and I was working in a department store, and somebody I was in the break room while the news broke, and somebody said, "Oh, well, those people deserve exactly what they got if they were that stupid." I was like, "There but for." Though I also, what are your feelings on survivor stories? Because I can see them as sort of double-edged.
Well, again, not for people, if the specific audience is people who are convinced by Scientology or indeed any other group, then survivor stories comes a little bit later on. I mean, once you've decided to step out of Scientology, read Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky. It's what it was written for.
Yeah,
Barefaced Messiah, which derives from it, and which I worked on. I was the only paid researcher for, and about half of it is Russell and his wife Renata got hold of. They did a brilliant job, but it's not written within the Scientologist mentality. When Stacey Young, Vaughan and Stacey Young, Vaughan was the head of the archive, the Hubbard archive. He was the PR who announced Hubbard's death. They both worked at the highest level of Scientology, and for David Miscavige at the end. And Stacey said to me that she'd written the critique, the Dead Agent pack on Bent Corridan's L. Ron Hubbard, Messiah or Madman. And she found lots of trivial, mistakes in it. I think the second edition, Brian Ambry managed to find most of those. And also said that I was the great expert on Hubbard and magic. And I thought Brian Ambry was the great expert on Hubbard. So there you go. But Blue Sky was written. It wasn't written for the general public. It was written for somebody who had been engaged with Scientology. Thankfully, other people have been able to understand it because I didn't follow the usual route, which is we will now describe an engram, secondary, and lock and how they fit into the R6 bank. And this is nonsense. We don't need to use his language to describe his concepts. Even Paulette Cooper's excellent Scandal of Scientology bogs down in a couple of places where she's trying to explain the crazy thinking. Excellent book, though, well worth reading. And
yeah,
of course, Tony Ortega's wonderful Unbreakable Miss Lovely about, she was harassed even more than I was by Scientology, if you can imagine such a thing. But
yeah.
get people to read Blue Sky when they're ready,
Mhm.
because that shows, the next level. The first level, as I say, is you're talking about how David Miscavige is violating the policy of Scientology. It's that narrow window where you say, well, Ron Hubbard says this, but Scientology is doing that. It's pretty easy to do because Hubbard contradicted almost everything he said. So
Mhm.
you can find him, like What Is Greatness, in March 66, he's, that you've got this test of somebody that they won't hate anybody. At the same time that he's actually writing the Guardian's Office material, first Guardian's Office orders, attacks on Scientology. There are 4 policy letters called that. And one of them is basically destroy people. So you can find contradictions throughout, but showing, the easy way to get somebody loose from it is to get them thinking again, to get them questioning and examining things, to get them to understand that if they are going to be self-determined, they have to be self-determined. It's not got to be coming from somewhere else. But once they've crossed that particular bridge, let's call it that, Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky was designed. Stacey Young said that when she read it, there was not one thing in it that she could have dead agented. It's, and they produced a dead agent pack with 60 points in it. 57 of the things said in that pack are answered in the book itself because they're chronological. So he says that it was banned in Victoria, Australia. Fact, the ban was lifted. It's like, yeah, read 20 pages further and you've got the lifting of the ban. You've also got me saying that the ban was stupid and wrong. That wasn't the right thing to do. If somebody's committing a criminal offense, you prosecute them for that. You don't prosecute them for being a member of a group that has a set of eccentric beliefs. If that's a member of a group that blows things up, that's a different matter. But so Blue Sky was written for that. And then beyond that, Russell's Barefaced Messiah is excellent and has one of the most wonderful titles of any book ever written, I think. I can remember the day that he came up with it and he rang me up and said, Barefaced Messiah. It's just brilliant. What a really succinct way of saying this is who Hubbard was. But after Blue Sky, I would say read Opening Our Minds, because again, it's there to open these things up. And then beyond that, I'd say watch the Toronto Getting Clear of Scientology conference. The first lecture of which is up on our site.
The first, second, and I think 13th.
So the one where Steve Hassan, Chris Shelton, Christian Shurko, and I
love that one.
Yeah, it took me years. I was talking with Steve Hassan for years leading up to that, saying, I really want to do something about what these techniques are doing. What the Dianetic Book One technique is doing, what the training routines are doing, because, those are the two things that generally hook people in Scientology, and they have no idea that it's moving them into a different state of mind. And, we've just had Steve and I have just had a chapter in a book called Psychiatry and Eastern Religion and Spirituality. And the chapter is about the ways in which pseudo-religious groups, let's call them that, claim devotion by appearing to give you transcendent experiences. And as I was writing the list of techniques that are used, is that the first time I've done this, I realized that if you went through that list, I don't know any religion that doesn't use one or other of those techniques. So there are simple ones like fasting, that if you fast for too long, you'll go into a different state, what some people would call an altered state. If you sleep deprivation, quite standard. Davening, this kind of rocking backwards and forwards while you're doing things, which is you'll find in the madrasas in Islam, and you'll find in certain Jewish sects as well. These, staring at something, marching round and round, chanting a word. There are so many. The Rajneeshis use hyperventilation. Stanislaus Grof, psychiatrist who did lots of experiments with LSD in Czechoslovakia, and then it was banned. He then had people doing hyperventilation. So you're going until you feel dizzy and high, and realizing that these are not transcendent states, they're physiological states, which is not to say that there's no such thing as spirituality or transcendence. I tend to shy away from such ideas myself, but I don't deny them. It is to say that it's very easy to get people to believe things, because experiencing is believing. Seeing is believing, and you can get people to see things and then they'll believe in them, But, so I think that's an introduction to the subject, and we'll think a bit more about it. But really, please suggest books, documentaries, movies, articles, things that you've seen that might be useful. I mean, and some of them are, the thing that alerted me to Scientology while I was still a member was The Pursuit of the Millennium by Norman Cohn, the historian, which is a description of millenarian cults that believe that the end days were coming in the Middle Ages. And I read this thing shortly before I went down to St. Hill to do my upper levels. And I kind of went, he's talking about fanaticism. And actually, a lot of my fellow Scientologists are fanatics. And I don't want to be. I don't like that idea. So there are all sorts of things that might be helpful, that might allow people to think a bit better.
I was just also thinking some of those ways to alter states are not just used in spiritual terms. The reason I was laughing was way back in my college days while I was a student studying musical composition, and I had about a week where I just couldn't write anything. And my professor said, well, what you do is you starve yourself for a day and don't sleep, and then you'll be able to compose something.
And it there is a certain truth to it that
Yeah.
your critical faculties collapse, and your self-criticism is among those things. It's often said, really often said by writers, that when you first wake up, start writing, and write whatever comes into your mind. You won't necessarily use it for anything, but it frees things up. I don't do that, because what comes out is nonsense in my case. So I like to be awake before I start to do anything. But I am aware, particularly say with writing poetry, that when you're very tired, when you're exhausted, that can be a point where you don't get in your own way anymore, and you can just let something come forward. And certainly these are not specifically religious practices at all. Mindfulness is very definitely using staring as a technique. And I'd just like to point out two things. Firstly, the whole Japanese imperial military meditated every day using exactly the technique that is used in mindfulness, which is not to say it's a wrong technique, but it is Zazen, which I learned in a Japanese monastery. I'm very familiar with it, and it was very useful for me. But the Japanese military were trained in. What's more, the SS meditated using Indian or Japanese practices. So meditation in and of itself, contrary to John Kabat-Zinn and Daniel Goleman, does not lead to a compassionate behavior. I think if you look at what the SS did, you could hardly call them compassionate. So these are techniques of changing your state of mind, and often they're techniques that are then used to control your state of mind, which would bring us to Yuval Lao's excellent work, which can be found on our site, How You Induce Awe in People. Well, I think that's enough, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. And please, please, please get into the comments and give us more to think about and talk about. And we'll probably put something up on the website when we've got a list of things. And it hopefully will be quite an extensive list, but it mustn't mention psychology or psychiatry. It mustn't have the word cult in it. And it mustn't talk about Scientology, because we're here trying to help people to rethink their involvement with Scientology specifically.
Yeah. Yes. I will say that I had an advantage in that point, because having such a small group, there's never been any books written about my group.
Well, write some books about it.
Oh, no, I couldn't after all this time. It's been too long.
You did put up the video about your experience in the end, didn't you?
Yes, yes.
So link that to this as well, so that people can see how much fun you had in your group.
Oh, just how strange everything was. Yes.
Well, thank you very much for watching, for spending your time with us, and get out there and tell everybody that they ought to, rather than going to Lad Bible or Andrew Gold, if they want the real stuff, this is the channel where it's happening. So thanks very much indeed. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.